I think that's a question worth asking in these days. But before I get too serious, I don't know if you're aware that in Africa, a large group of baboons is called a congress. Now suddenly my government makes much more sense. It is, in fact, one of the things that we do. We either complain about or we make fun of our government. We may not like it. In fact, there are times where we are adamantly opposed to it. And I think because that is the norm, not only in the United States but in every country, it behooves us to see what the Bible says about how we should interact with our government. And what may surprise you is the Bible, and including Jesus Christ, have a great deal to say about how you deal with your government. Our first scripture today will be Matthew 22, verses 15 through 22. And Jesus is talking, and it says, "Then the Pharisees went and plotted on how to entangle him in his words. And they went to their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, 'Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully, and you do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not?' But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, 'Why put me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin for the tax.' And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, 'Whose likeness and inscription is this?' And they said, 'Caesar's.' And he said then to them, 'Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.' And when they heard that, they marveled, and they left him and went away." The Pharisees wanted to trip Jesus up. They wanted to prove him a rebel against Caesar, or against Rome. And they were rather perplexed when he gave them the answer that he gave him. What he said is, "You're living in Roman control." And I will tell you, it wasn't a pleasant living. They were very unhappy with their country. They were very unhappy with their government. However, Jesus' response was quite clear. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Give to God what is God's. And don't confuse the two. A little later in history, Paul wrote Romans. And Romans 13:1-7 is even more specific. It says, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority from God but those that exist that have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to the good conduct, but to the bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience. For because of this you pay taxes, for the authority of the ministers of God, attending to this very thing. Pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, honor to whom honor is owed." And I will tell you, those verses sit poorly with many folks today, because there are a lot of folks that tell me that the government that they serve under doesn't represent God anymore. They literally believe the time is coming soon that we should rebel in our government. And I'm here to tell you, they're not wrong in saying that the government is not following God. They are wrong in suggesting that revolution is the first answer. Because Christians have dealt with poor governments throughout time. We do not, and we are not called to follow people like Adolf Hitler. And when Romans was written by Paul, he was under the governorship of a guy named Nero, who was a Caesar, ruler of the Roman government. And Nero was a tyrant. In fact, I would suggest, if you study Nero, you could easily argue that he was every bit as evil as Adolf Hitler, if not more so. So Paul is writing these words under the governorship of a man who is a tyrant. And he is literally telling you, obey the laws of the land. Did Nero deserve the office he had? I would suggest not. But he is in an office. He is to be respected. But, and you know that word, that three-letter word is so powerful, because what somebody will tell you is that if you use that three-letter word after making a statement, what you're about to say is to negate everything you just said. And in some degree, I perhaps am. I don't know how many of you are familiar with a pastor named Adrian Rogers, who has since passed, but he was a famous pastor many years. And in talking about the government and talking about obedience, he made a very clear point that I think is important for a Christian to understand. Submission does not equal obedience. And I am here to tell you that just because my government tells me I must do something, if it is ungodly, I as a Christian am obligated not to follow that rule. In Nero's time, the Christians were told they could not worship God. They were persecuted for worshiping God, and yet they continued to do so. They were submissive to their country, but they weren't necessarily obedient. And that becomes a fine line that gets to be very hard to discern. You noticed I mentioned Adolf Hitler. And there were people in Hitler's Germany. And one man, whom some of you may have heard before, but his name is Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a pastor in Germany at the time of Adolf Hitler. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, when Hitler first came to power, believed strongly that, as Romans 13 says, he should obey what Adolf Hitler said. But as he struggled and watched the genocide that Hitler was unloading, he then came to a point where he left following Adolf Hitler's every order, and in fact became part of an assassination plot against Adolf Hitler that failed and ultimately cost Dietrich Bonhoeffer his life. Dietrich Bonhoeffer is a famous Christian author, and I will tell you that when he rebelled against Adolf Hitler, he did not do it lightly. He tried to be submissive, but at one point he could no longer do it because of the evil that Hitler was doing. You cannot follow a government to hell. If your government is designing its values to take us all to hell, then you must at some point say, no, I cannot. And that makes it difficult, because for the Christian, I'm called to be subject to my government, even a government as corrupt as Nero's, even a government as corrupt as perhaps what you might see our government today as. But I'm also called not to allow it to take me away from what my Christian values tell me I'm supposed to be. And I will suggest that today you will find many people who will tell you the government of today does not represent Christian values, that it does not allow for freedom of Christianity. And there are folks who will tell you it's time for a revolution. It's time for something different. But as I said in the beginning, I have yet to see anyone tell me what they would replace this with that would be better. Our forefathers had the same dilemma when we revolted against England. And I'm here to tell you, as we look back on history, We see that pretty much as a one-way view. But I'm also here to tell you that there were many American citizens that quoted Romans 13 to the folks that were suggesting we have a revolution against King George and saying, no, we should be loyal to the crown. And I will suggest to you that that's a point that each of us has to come to. I will also suggest to you that many will suggest it's time for that revolution again, and I do not believe we have. I do believe we have corruption in our government, and I do believe it's time to take action, but it's not in the form of a revolution. It's not in the form of allowing it to continue, but it's what I consider the Christian duty of every American citizen. We, the people, as that one document so wonderfully says, are called to hold our government accountable. We, the people, are to elect and limit their authority, especially when they decide to go beyond what their authority says they should. We, the people, as good Christians, are to take our government and be its conscience. And I will tell you that the reason we're in the mess we're in is because we, the people, have negated our duties. We have allowed politicians and media to tell us what we should believe and how we should think. And the truth of it is, there's an old saying, you have the government you deserve. And I will have to say, sadly, we are living in a government that we deserve because we, the people, have failed to hold our people accountable. When Jesus told the people to give to Caesar what is Caesar's, he meant pay your taxes, pay respect, but I also believe he meant hold him accountable. Question when he says wrong things. And today, in our politics today, we quit questioning, especially because what we have divided ourselves into in 2021 is a two-party government that is so divided that we cannot see the in-between. We are very quick to look at that other party and show them the corruption, the total wrongness that they're in. But then when I look at my own party, I'm quick to put blinders on and say, well, at least they're the same letter as I am, so maybe I don't want to look too closely. That type of partisan politics is what led Rome to fall. If you look at the history of Rome and you see the politics that were playing, the senators that were fighting amongst each other, the playing of games and the party politics, Rome fell because it quit being about a government for the people, for the people's benefit, and it became a political game of whose party is going to win. We as Christians are called to be first Christians. My loyalty is always to be Jesus Christ first. But Paul is quite clear that as a Christian living in a country with a government, my loyalty is also to be to my government. And that government must be held accountable. It must be questioned. It must be challenged when it does wrong. And that is not done with a rifle. It is done in a voting booth. It is not done by following my party's politics to a letter, even when it's wrong. But it's by questioning even the people I agree with when they do things improperly. If we fail to do that, we will fall. Rome fell, and it wasn't much older. In fact, it fell, I believe, just over 200 years. I forgot to look that up before I got here, so I may be wrong on that. But I believe Rome fell just around 200 years into its existence. We are pushing 250 years in the United States of America. We are no less exempt from failing and falling. And I will here to tell you that all the signs of a collapse of our government are in place. I am rather upset with my government. And whether you believe that that's because it's a partisan thing and who got elected president last time is irrelevant. I'm going to take you back 20 years ago to a Republican president who made a little motion after a terrorist action in New York. He signed into a bill called the Patriot Act. And as soon as I heard about this Patriot Act, and as soon as I saw what was in it, I said, this is terrible. This is terrible because it violates the Constitution. It violates the Bill of Rights. It's wrong. Since its inception, almost 20 years ago, the Patriot Act has been used by 2 Republican presidents and 2 Democrat presidents to violate the rights of U.S. citizens. In fact, one president used it to kill 2 U.S. citizens without trial. To tell you that that's wrong should be unnecessary. To tell you that it should be challenged should be superfluous. It should be a common thing to say, this is wrong, this is improper. And yet, that very act is still in power today, being used by our current president inappropriately. And I'm not being picky on whether that's a Democrat president or Republican, because like I said, since its inception, both Republicans and Democrats have misused this. Every president, from George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, to Joe Biden, have used this action illegally, according to our Constitution of our United States. We, the people, should be abhorrent at that. But what happens is, we look at who's in office, and we go, well, as long as that letter agrees with me, I'm okay with them doing a little bit of nasty. And I had a conversation with a man who shares the same letter as me right after the Patriot Act was signed. And when I told him that I thought it was an illegal action that was going to bring the downfall of our country, he shrugged his shoulders and says, well, what do you want us to do? We got to do something. And I says, yes, we do need to do something. But it has to be legal. It has to be constitutional. It has to be done within the Bill of Rights, lest we throw away what our forefathers brought forth some 250 years ago. We have been a shining beacon to this world in the way of human rights and freedom. Now, as you can find if you turn open to any newspaper or listen to any newscast, we have not always done it perfectly, but I will tell you, we've done it better than most. In fact, I defy you to find a government that has done better at human rights than we have. And throughout the time when we were doing it wrong, there were individuals, usually Christian individuals, by the way, who were challenging our government and saying, I believe you are wrong. Back in the late 1800s, before the Civil War, the Supreme Court upheld a man's right to his slave that ran away. He demanded that that property be returned to him, and the United States Supreme Court upheld that in a judicial decision, which was since overturned by a later Supreme Court. Why? Because that decision was wrong. Human beings are not property. They never should have been considered property. It was changed because good people, I would consider Christian people, challenged their government, questioned it when they were wrong, and said, this must change. This is inappropriate, this is wrong. We, the people, are called to be the conscience of our country. And as Christians, more so than the average citizen, because we have a moral guide in the Bible that tells us what is right, what is wrong. And when we fail to follow that, and when we fail to hold our government accountable, we fail our job as citizens. And when we fail our job as citizens, it is not surprising that our government begins to fail too. 1 Peter 2, 13 through 17 says, "Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it is the emperor as the supreme or the governors who are sent to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of the foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as the servants of God. Honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor." I will tell you that what Peter is saying there is more today than it ever is. He's calling us to live as free people, but we're also called to consider that we are living for God. Not my political party, not even my government to that extent. I am called to serve God in the country that I am given. And we are blessed to be in this country, where there is more freedom today than there ever has been in this world before. But I will say, the freedoms we have are quickly disappearing. We are being challenged. We are definitely going to face a time whether those values survive or not depend on individuals like you and like me as to whether or not we hold our government accountable. We need to take our elected officials and resolve to them that they work for us. They are about, as they say, the people's business. And they do very much work for you and me. And if they do not, they need to be quickly replaced. Because to be honest with you, my friends, we live in a country where a person is elected to an office as a senator or a congressperson, and they make about $175,000 a year. And after 20 years in that office, they frequently leave millionaires. Now, you can add up the money and realize the expense that they have to run that office, to live and have residences in Washington, D.C. and in their home state. And it quickly adds up that you do not become a millionaire on $175,000 a year unless you're making money where you shouldn't. And I did not look it up. I probably should, because it probably would just make me mad. How many millionaires are in the Senate and Congress? I'm telling you, there's far too many. Far too many have gone into that office for their own gain, for their own agendas, and they have forgotten why they're there. And I'm here to tell you, I'm no prophet, but I'm here to tell you that if we don't change that, our country is doomed. No question. It will not last. It will not necessarily fall to a revolution, because the Roman government was not overthrown by a revolution. It was overthrown by other countries who saw the weakness of the government and the corruption and simply came in and took over. That's a problem for you and me, because as a Christian citizen of this country, I am called to be responsible as a citizen. I'm called to be educated, to consider the people who run for office, to disregard, in many cases, that political letter that comes after their name, and look to see who does represent this country the best, who represents the values that we stand for. If we do that, I believe this country has a chance. If we don't, I don't believe we do. We, the people, as that wonderful document says, have the ultimate authority over our government. But we have ceded that to politicians and media sources to tell us what they think we should do, how we should vote. And my friends, when you take advice from people who already have biases, I trust that you know you cannot trust them. They will lead you astray. They will not give you the best of their life for our country. There's a story of a teacher who gave the kids an assignment. They were to sell something and explain how it related to people's lives. And the following Monday, the kids came back, and little Sally led off, and she sold Girl Scout cookies and made $30. And she says, my sales approach was to appeal to customers' civil spirit, and I credit that approach for my obvious success. The teacher said, very good. And the other little boy said, you know, I sold magazines, and I made $45, and I explained that everyone's magazine would keep them up on current events. The teacher said, very good. And then there was a little boy named Little Johnny, which every joke has Little Johnny as the catch guy, isn't it? And he says, what'd you do? And he says, well, I made $2,467 last weekend. And the teacher was like, what? He goes, yeah, $2,467. And she goes, what in the world were you selling? He said, toothbrushes. And the teacher was quite not sure about this. She says, how could you possibly sell enough toothbrushes to make that kind of money? He said, well, it's real simple, actually. I found the busiest corner on the town, and I set up a dip and chip stand, and I gave everybody that was walking by a free sample. And they all said the same thing. This dip, it tastes like dog crap. And he says, it is dog crap. Want to buy a toothbrush? He then went on to explain, I used the government approach of giving you something for free and then making you pay to get that taste out of your mouth. Sadly, little Johnny has a very accurate grasp on our government. And I'm here to tell you, it's time for you and me to quit buying. We are to represent America and our God, and we are to tell our politicians to do the same or to find a new job. It is what a godly Christian would do in Caesar's country. Now, Caesar's Rome was the most powerful country in its time. But because of its corruption, it is no longer in existence. It's gone. Not from a revolution, not from an overthrow, simply because of corrupt government led to an easy dismissal of its power. We are not immune to that, but we Christians have an obligation to ensure that that does not happen. We as Christians have an obligation to tell people that there is a Bible and that it does give us the answers to how we should live and how we should be governed. And my friends, the question remains, what will happen to us in this country? And the answer is, it remains to be seen. But if we're going to survive, it will take men and women of faith going to a ballot box and telling our politicians, enough is enough. We either turn back and do honest government, or you will be gone. If we do that, I believe we have hope. If we do not do that, we will follow Caesar's Rome into history books as a country that once existed, but does no more. Thank you.